in the EU. By 2025, they've got some pretty heavy mandates in terms of our business, in terms of eco-friendly and sustainability. Part of that is a carbon neutral rating that will indicate how much carbon is being used by a particular product.
Welcome to Clothing Culture, a fashion industry podcast at the intersection of technology and innovation. I'm Emily Lane.
And I'm Bret Schnitker. We speak with experts and disruptors who are moving the industry forward and discuss solutions to real industry challenges.
Clothing Culture is produced by Stars Design Group, a global design and production house with more than 30 years of experience. Welcome back to another episode of Clothing Culture. You are joining us once again at our countertop. For our guests, you could call it a little counterculture today. These are our conversations where we're highlighting very topical moments in our industry. And we just got back from the World Retail Congress 2024. It was an amazing experience with lots of hot topics within the conversations among the attendees and, of course, those that were on stage, keynote speakers. So we thought today we would do a quick turn on this episode so that we could share the highlights and key takeaways from our experience in Paris attending the World Retail Conference. It was a marvelous event, wasn't it, Bret?
Yeah, it was. I think, a lot of inspiring conversation about innovation, talking very openly about challenges between, some of the largest retailers in the world. It was interesting how there was a lot of common, focuses and challenges, opportunities. Within all of that, baked within that, sustainability was a really huge key topic, and we'll talk about that later. But that seems to find its way in every conversation today. And, having the World Retail Congress in Europe, you can imagine that's more, at least it's more relevant and more kind of on the surface than it is in the U.S. We tend to be a little bit of a follower there,
right?
But it was really, really
insightful.
Yeah, it was insightful. Sure,
yeah.
Sure.
I think we are going to focus on a handful of key topics today, and I have it broken up into A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Don't worry, we're not going to go through the entire alphabet.
So more than the ABCs of innovation in
right,
retail.
Right. But let's start at the very beginning. The hottest topic, AI.
Yeah.
And this was a theme that we saw not only, of course, at the World Retail Congress, but just prior to that event, we participated in the AI Summit, which AI in itself was such a huge topic that we will be breaking that out into a whole separate episode. But today, let's talk about some of the key conversations around this, generative AI, some of the applications, opportunities, and things to be aware of.
Yeah, standard AI has been around for a long time, and especially in supply chain, artificial intelligence, making repetitive decisions, on fulfillment and things like that as it relates to retail. It's been around really since the late 20th century. Generative AI is really the game changer.
What does generative AI really mean?
Well, people would like to, in quotation, say it's kind of thinking intelligence, right? Mm-hmm. And they talk about deep AI and generative AI, and it really is a more intelligent thought process that in some ways the machines are learned to kind of continuously educate themselves and adapt, pulling in more information. And it's finding its way in all sorts of areas, from logistics, design, all over the place. And those conversations occurred everywhere. I think getting your hands around, AI in general it's such a vast topic, and it's moving ever so quickly. From the retail perspective, I believe that they're embracing the opportunity that it can solve some of the challenges that they've had in the past. Yeah. But on the other side, the real challenge is the cost of implementation. When a large and the Congress was really attended by some very, very large organizations. pivoting from existing systems that they have,
Takes
moving
time
to
and
new
money,
ones.
right?
It's time and money, it's implementation, it's by the time you put that in, is that already outdated? I mean,
Right.
Technology and generative artificial intelligence is moving so quickly. That was certainly a hot topic on how to implement it.
Some
correctly.
of those best practices
Yeah.
things to be aware of. Some of those key areas of opportunity that you mentioned that are being recognized by retailers is helping aid in communication, helping to improve customer service and experience,
Making a unique experience for every customer that comes on, learning the customer's habits and dishing them up, a unique, tailored experience for them, for sure. Yeah.
Creative opportunities, of course, we've already talked about that in the past.
And we're involved in doing that, and that's moving at such a quick pace, and we're excited to see, from our perspective, the design AI is at this stage for us providing ideation. It's helping our designers come up with, new concepts and new variations of concepts. I'm not really sure we're replacing designers as everyone. That was a big topic.
It was a big concern,
personnel.
right? There is concern about people losing jobs over technology, and that's a common theme that we see when things change.
Happened when that little thing called the World Wide Web came into existence, and everyone thought, certain jobs were losing jobs, and what you really find is, and I always say it, evolution, not revolution, is that in evolving landscapes and evolving technology, some jobs do go away, but it's replaced by new jobs in that complete environment. And with the web, and all of that, all these new jobs were developed that didn't exist before that. So I think AI is going to be that same way. One of the big topics that was also discussed is that, there is this thought process that AI, you just say, AI rubbing a magic lamp and genie, and then it solves everything. And the big discussion that they had was the interface with AI is important. And all these companies are kind of coming up to help be the interface with AI, because many cases at this stage, AI can be much more literal, and human beings have to learn to communicate with AI to get the results that they want.
Yeah, it can help optimize operations and streamline certain things, but there's still a need for that human element.
Or another kind of interface to be able to properly get the results you want with AI.
Another area of opportunity is analytics. And where there's analytics, there's data. And where there's data, there comes a need for enhanced policies to ensure your information is being protected and not used wrongly.
Or not even thought through the implications. There was one story that was discussed in the AI Summit, which I thought was relatively, mind-blowing. But a large retailer ran all of their financials through AI to create, a pretty clean package for investors and everything else. And what they didn't realize is that as a person was applying for a new position within the organization, he asked AI what would be a good salary within this organization to ask for this new position. And it basically, with the information that was downloaded, it gave him the salaries of every person that worked in the organization. And so, whoops, that's a pretty amazing, hiccup for sure. So they really talked about having policies in place, understanding, that AI is not necessarily as private as you think. And then that goes back to the comment earlier, is these interfaces that you need to have, to avoid, different situations that you don't want to have happen.
Right. There needs to be an implementation plan. You need to make sure that you have a really ethical thought process when implementing it, that you're continuing to monitor it and make sure, because there's things we don't know until we go through it.
Yeah. In the past, AI is really, and our planning and forecasting functions in retail have really looked historically. The benefit of Gen AI and some of the new applications that are going on is that AI can take in all sorts of interesting data subsets. They can take in economic conditions globally. They can take in supply chain issues in terms of, trade routes. They can take in weather automatically, and that can help manipulate some of the outcomes and decisions. And it's more forward thinking. The hope is that with a proper implementation of AI, is that I've said before, the first thing I learned as a buyer is you either overbuy or underbuy. You never buy the right amount. The overbuy situation was certainly a big topic. The landfills, and again, going back to the sustainability, if we implement AI in the proper process, I think taking the human error out of it, the human emotion or the human analysis of historical data and utilizing AI to really fold itself all the way up the supply chain, you might make more accurate decisions in terms of quantities and overbuy less.
Huge opportunity for sure. And again, because this is such a big topic and there were many rich conversations around this very topic, we will have another episode to follow this up and provide even more detail.
Yeah.
It's time to move on to bracketing, the big ugly monster of bracketing. Let's talk about the challenges that every retailer was discussing with regards to what is happening here.
Yeah, an astounding comment actually was that in online business for many retailers, the online business is a marketing opportunity, not a profit opportunity. And one of the big reasons for that is the bracketing. When someone buys 3, returns 2 to get the right size. They talked about online return rates upwards of 40%. And we've talked about that in the past, that size, fit, transparency, things like that are super important as we move into an online environment because all profits get eaten up when you're moving goods back and forth on returns and exchanges. In the old days, when a customer would walk into a retail store, the decision was made in the retail store that the size didn't fit. They'd try a different size or they would try it on. They didn't like it. And basically the experience began and ended there. The sale began and ended there. And you didn't have really additional costs.
Yeah.
When you move into an online world and you get all these returns and exchanges, customer dissatisfaction for whatever reason, those expenses eat into the bottom line and profit in an aggressive way.
Right.
And that was a real eye-opener when they really came out and said, look, this isn't a money maker for us in online from a basic retail experience. It was really a marketing thing only to grow customer.
Yeah, not only is bracketing detrimental to the bottom line and profitability, but it is also a challenge with regard to the sustainability question, moving good parcels back and forth and all of that. So it really has more than one angle that can benefit by solving this problem, improving transparency in your sizing, having consistency from style to style, and really focused on improving that particular challenge.
And it was interesting. It came back to AI again. That conversation came back to AI again, and they said, can AI track the customer's buying habits? And if there's a particular customer that does bracketing more than ever, do you increase and charge them returns and exchanges costs and shipping costs? If a customer is a particularly better customer and doesn't have returns and exchanges at the level, do you offer them free shipping? It is a way that helps dissect customers to improve profitability automatically.
You mentioned that e-com equals marketing, essentially now. One of the staggering conversations that we uncovered during this time was that sometimes the e-com online store is the top competitor of that brand's in-store market.
Yeah.
So that was one that just was like, oh, I never thought about that.
Yeah, for sure.
But that being said, having that touch and feel is still incredibly important to retailers. And there was a lot of conversation about how to improve even that experience for customers.
And we have a long way to go to solve the online. It's not just the panacea. Online is not the panacea, even though it's going to be a multi-trillion-dollar business.
Right.
Very, very soon.
That's right. C, carbon neutral. This, to me, I think, is one of the biggest questions and hurdles, and an area that I got to tell you, I don't think I had a formal clarity on. There were companies out there, Goliaths of companies, saying that they were 100% carbon neutral. But I really have to ask the question, how? You put your goods on a boat, you put them on a plane, you move them from the mill to a factory, you're using fuel. How can you be truly carbon neutral in this day? And where are the opportunities to be more, let's just call it carbon friendly?
Yeah, I think that's probably a better phrase. We as humans consume our share of carbon all the time. We're consumers of carbon in every way that we interact with food and travel and everything else. And, that has always been a very thorny conversation. You've got eco-friendly, you've got carbon neutral. When you're eco-friendly, in some cases, you're not carbon neutral in others. And I'm not really sure the industry has really sorted out those solutions yet. There was a lot of talk about that. Again, being in the EU, by 2025, they've got some pretty heavy mandates in terms of our business, in terms of eco-friendly and sustainability. Part of that is a carbon neutral rating that will indicate how much carbon is being used by a particular product. And I think the identification is probably the first stage. There's a lot of conversation about you can buy carbon offset credits. There's an investment in that.
What do those credits do?
Well, it's an investment back into the environment is what we're being told is when you buy carbon credits of an individual organization, those credits as simply could go back and plant more trees, right?
I see, yes.
And so there's some of that happening. I'm not really sure that's a full, proper distillation of carbon credits, but I think it's a complex landscape. It's good that the conversation is happening. It's happening at a much more accelerated rate in the EU than it is in the United States presently. But certainly people in the United States, Fabletics, for one that was on the stage, was having a big conversation about working toward becoming more carbon neutral.
I think this is an area that has great risk for greenwashing. We've talked in the past about, hey, somebody's trying, they're trying. It isn't a flip the switch solution right now. It just, our industry just doesn't have the infrastructure and all the parts and pieces figured out yet. So don't shame somebody for trying. But I think having more honest conversation about what is a real opportunity and what is not is, I think, where we're going to see progress.
Well, that's where the big debate comes, because everyone has a different perspective. Everyone has a different measure of what proper sustainability is and what greenwashing is. And some people can be pretty black and white about it, and some people can be a little bit more gray. Remember, this is a journey. It's not a destination, and it's going to take a lot of time. And I think outside of the ones that are being very, very intentionally misleading about eco-friendly, practices, the effort and focus on trying to make a move toward more environmentally friendly production, or trying to satisfy carbon credits to be aware of our usage is not a bad conversation. We need to be careful about slapping greenwashing very, very quickly on different organizations, because one of the conversations too is that people just won't step in for fear of litigation or backlash. Right.
Yeah. So there was an overarching theme of the World Retail Congress, and it was disrupt or be disrupted. That, of course, is our D we're going to talk about today. I had some initial questions on this because it kind of flies in the face of a mantra that we have, which is evolution, not revolution.
Yes, right.
And so many of the things that we're talking about today, from AI to carbon neutral, that is going to be a process of evolution. It's not like I said, flip the switch kind of thing. So let's really talk about some of the things that they were talking about with regards to disruption and how to stay relevant in the industry. We did hear from some Goliaths again in this industry, and I see some opportunities. Let's talk about some of those. Yeah,
I would say, for lack of a better term, I think disrupt or to be disrupted is a little market speak. I think that falls more in the line of revolution, and that can be costly, and you can make a lot of mistakes in that regard. I I would continue my mantra of evolution, not revolution, and be mindful of all the changes that are occurring in the industry and adapt as quickly as possible and as conscientiously and thoughtfully as possible along this path. Early adopters, I tend to be one in technology. I love the new latest shiny object, but they don't usually have the kinks worked out. And if you're trying to be disruptive and make massive changes really quickly with things that aren't fully baked, you could have some expenses that you really aren't thinking through. So there's probably a proper pace for most people, along this whole path. It was interesting, the people in the room that certainly were disruptors.
Right. We heard
and Shein was one of them.
Right.
And that was a very, very interesting conversation. We'll probably go more in depth on that conversation in another episode. But I think that he articulated his point of view pretty well. That was an interesting room when Shein was on stage, because certainly in terms of disruption, they've disrupted the market in general in terms of what they've done. The accurate statement about Shein, honestly, is that they are disrupting the U.S. economy in terms of traditional imports, because they've skirted the typical laws of de minimis.
Right.
Anything shipped under $800 is shipped duty free. Importers traditional importers are shipping in larger units. They're subject to tariffs out of China. They're subject to paying duties, which are the taxes for imports, and some of that can be up to 40%. The U.S. customer pays that. Shein, and the reason that tariffs are in place, even though my position on tariffs, they never have worked, was to perhaps provide a wake-up call for China to have trade balance, et cetera. Well, the Chinese organizations, Shein in general, were very disruptive, because they said, well, the U.S. importers can pay all these. We're going to ship
find another
piece
way.
by piece into the U.S. under de minimis and pay nothing. And so I think that at its core, very intelligent in terms of what they've done. And it has changed the business model for fast fashion and large volume, and certainly it's massive volume, not even large volume. It's massive volume that's coming into the U.S. and it's basically flooding the U.S. with lots of garments in the world. It's a lot of units, and so you give them credit for creating an engine that is data driven, that creates unique experiences for individuals, that causes them to close business. They ship it super, super affordably, direct, in small quantities, on fashion leaders, driving fad, skirting duties and tariffs. And so that certainly was a disruptive conversation. Very clever, yeah.
Another disruptor in this space is discounters, closing in on that middle market. You have real-time retail, which is leveraging more technology. We talked a little bit about that earlier. Brands consolidation. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, discounters are finding new ways to elevate product experience for customers, and their goal is to move a little bit more moderate. The goal, again, that would help with sustainability is that if you're improving quality, that garment lasts longer, people buy less and pay more, then you're not filling landfills at such an outrageous rate. You don't have that disposable clothing mentality. And again, that's sort of expected in a conversation like Europe, because they've always had more of a focus of an investment in their wardrobes. And you kind of wish the rest of the world would kind of think through that and spend a nice level on a super, super nice suit or an outfit and wear it for 10 or 15 years, buy less. And then there have been some interesting articles written that a lot of the industry that relies heavily on manufacturing, if we simply went up 15 or 20% in cost overall, we could produce significantly less garments. It would sustain the entire economy as well, if not better. And so, that was one of the conversations with that for sure.
We heard a little bit about circular retail and how secondhand apparel is on the rise, which is very complementary to a more sustainable conversation. This being by 2027, a $350 billion industry.
Yeah.
That's some impact.
Yeah, there was a lot of conversation about that for sure. We know a lot of organizations that are out there, brands, if you will, that are out there that are doing it well, and many others that have stepped in and lost a lot doing it. Mm-hmm. They just haven't been super effective on that. You're finding more and more coming into that space, and the question is, as more come into that, how do you really manage that? How are you profitable? It's always great to be the first one on the block or the second or whatever, but when you've got a lot of folks on the block, how are you unique? How do you compete with a lot of noise in that space? It was interesting when we walked through one of the department stores in Paris, how they had an entire shop dedicated to upcycling, recycling, and it was actually being done in the store.
Yeah.
Very French thing to do,
Yes.
is to jump on the sustainability aspect. But it was also really kind of very cool to see.
Yeah.
And they were one-of-a-kind pieces. The person was, reinventing these garments or bags, I think,
Bags,
jackets, things like that in the store. And that was kind of interesting to see. So, the adoption of this whole thing is I think a cog in the wheel to help, the sustainability freight train, right?
Absolutely. Well, we're talking sustainability, so let's just go right into eco-friendly.
Yeah.
Of course, a key topic, and you addressed a little bit about some of the European standards, really driving, I think, the future of the near future of this conversation. Those who are doing business globally right now, if you have consumers in the United States, you're United States based, but you're also distributing to Europe. There's some things that you're going to need to know.
Yeah, by 2025, you're going to have some specific additional requirements to ship into the EU that you should be prepared for. We'll probably set up a separate podcast to be able to dialogue about that, because I think that deserves some attention and be able to go into depth for sure. But I think it's a combination of trying to be more eco-friendly, but for them it's about transparency, having tags that are transparent about different usage of materials. I would tell you that, it's still going to be a monumental lift because, there's just not that much available globally and something truly eco-friendly and sustainable. It's a very, very small percentage. Yeah. And we're really, as an industry, moving more and more away from materials that are eco-friendly. We're moving heavily more into synthetics.
Yeah.
And synthetics are certainly not eco-friendly. There's not a lot of great alternatives in bioplastics or biosynthetics right now.
Well, and we've talked about it in previous episodes too on the just how many hands are in the process of one garment.
Yeah.
So when you're talking transparency and traceability and things of that nature that take you all the way back to a bale of cotton, and you realize how many steps that fiber to fabric to product to landing at your door, there's just so many hands in it. So having pure traceability, transparency, again, monumental challenge.
And there's a massive expense to that. So it was interesting here. Technology steps in again, and we met a interesting guy at the end of our AA conference that came up, and we had a nice chat. And he's actually got a software development company that's created a unique program that will automatically calculate the carbon credits for a particular garment based upon attributes that you put in it. That's going to be super important because there will be tags on, garments in the future about how many carbon units it's going to take to create that garment.
I wonder how long it'll take to filter out into other products beyond apparel.
Yeah, well, I think it's going to be a requirement across the board for EU. We'll see how well that gets implemented in 2025. Not too far away.
Yeah. So we're talking a lot about future innovations. We've been talking about the digital world and AI. I found it really surprising that some companies were amazed and awed by 3D technology.
Yeah.
But we've also talked about that really pre-COVID. Gosh, less than 2% of the industry was using this technology, and then post-COVID, more adoption happened into that 15% range. So it is still nascent in our industry, but using that 3D technology to improve visualization, speed up timelines, minimize waste. That was a powerful conversation to
It was
many.
one of the largest European retail groups that came on stage and very proudly said that they had moved to this new technology about developing, their stuff in 3D modeling. And certainly the technology that came up was browseware. We've been using it for, I think, almost 15 years. And it was a little self-gratifying to know that we were way ahead on that one.
Yes.
And that was really welcomed, received, and presented as a disruptive new technology, right?
Yeah. We've been talking about, of course, the supply chain transparency and technology that's being developed to support that.
Yeah.
And then, of course, data, all of these tools to help you leverage your data to improve customer experience.
Yeah, that was, boy, the week was filled with technology companies that are coming to the table to offer solutions in a number of different areas. And, it just goes back to, our foundation at STARS has always been talent and technology, and that, fashion, apparel, retail, all the different aspects that are out there, we're ever linked with technology. And it's, if you think you're going to wake up one day and do things the old-fashioned way, and old-fashioned could have a lot of different meanings for different people, but that's just an impossibility. Technology is here to stay, and it's as technology does, it's accelerating at a pace that people are struggling to understand. Just like greenwashing has got a backlash for eco-friendly, there was this whole AI backlash and technology backlash because one of the keynote speakers were dialoguing about how they really don't want to even dialogue about AI per se. They're dropping that from some conversations because, and this was kind of off stage when we were talking in one of the meeting rooms, but they, people think that they're going to have success in their company by simply just adding AI to their name. And, because it's the hot big thing. And so this one individual, this lady who actually was on some of the forefront of really dynamic AI research, she doesn't even allow that to be a conversation, on a daily basis. Don't use the term, and because it's been so overused.
It's too polarizing.
Yeah, it's just been so overused.
Yeah. G, here we are. We're almost at the end of our suite here. We're at G.
That's tough.
But
Gee whiz.
Geopolitical variables.
Yeah.
I'm glad that they really brought this up, because this is something that in our space, as we work with retailers, there's often not a lot of forgiveness on if there's a delay or things are taking longer than it used to because of geopolitical issues. You've got a war that breaks out and a canal shuts down, or COVID happens and cargo ships are in the wrong places, and all these things. And
politicians think they're brilliant and try to, with tariffs affect change through inefficient means, and that affects our business. And that's never been more prevalent than over the past few years. You've got interest. They talked about this, interest rates higher than ever. They talk about shipping rates that are mainly fluctuating. There are still economic struggles and slowdowns in Europe.
A lot of wavering confidence based on some of the conflicts that we have that are still looming between Ukraine and Russia. You've got Iraq, you have Iran, you have
Israel-Iran conflict.
Yes, exactly. The future of U.S. based upon the upcoming elections. You have U.S.-China relations. I mean, it just goes on and on and on.
Yeah.
And these were all key topics of concern and question.
Yeah, the world's always been complicated. There's always been something going on. Yeah. But it feels like it's all, environmental. You just layer all the complexities that we're dealing with on a global basis today, and you could see it resonating in the room. That consumer confidence is highly impacted by some of these different areas.
I'm glad the conversations are happening, because awareness is key to developing a strategy to make sure that your business plan can accommodate, this ever-changing landscape.
Yeah, for sure.
So, H, we're here. Ha ha ha! Hey, yay!
Yay is why.
Oh, okay.
That works.
Well, The H, we have a few H's. It's all the same beginning. Hyper, localization, hyper transparency, hyper personal experiences, emotioneering. These are all, everything's getting hyped up in the hyper zone during this conference. So tell me a little bit about some of the hypering that we're going to be experiencing.
Well, this is all, again, wrapping all back down to artificial intelligence. They're talking about how do they overcome some of the supply chain issues. So they're really focusing on different areas of that transparency.
Localization, hyper
localization. Well, that's the real-time experience for customers, and how do you, on a global scale, provide a unique customer experience for each and every person. That's where AI kind of pops in.
And also accommodate, kind of your different product for different areas, right? Yes.
Again, adding complexity to the landscape, causing inventory to be inefficient. I'm not sure that's a solution. I think that's a complication, and that's where AI can step in the proper context, with a proper interface, and perhaps help in those areas for sure.
Well, I think it was just an outstanding group of conversations, really wonderful leaders and innovators that we got a chance to meet and hear from, and then all of those that were actually attending the conference were also among those that had very thoughtful things to discuss.
And it was an open and dialogue intensive conference, which was really great.
Yeah, I agree. Well, we have made it to the end of this segment of the alphabet. To carry this forward would require another day.
I
as
just
a summary,
look. Well, that's I forgot K. Sorry.
I just look to know a little more.
Yes, there we go. No.
Next. Well, anyway, thank you for sharing this conversation with me. Any other key thoughts you want to share before we wrap this up today?
Hopefully, I'll get over my jet lag soon. I'm struggling mightily. It's bedtime for me.
Yes,
right now.
That's right. Yeah. Yes. Well, thank you for joining us on this Bar Talk conversation, where we talked about the highlights from the World Retail Congress 24. Don't forget to subscribe to stay apprised of upcoming conversations, which will include a deeper dive into AI. We'll see you then. Thank you.